Welcome, everyone, to tonight's Democracy Docket event. It is a very exciting lineup that we have. I want to, before we go ahead and begin and introduce people who are participating tonight and introduce our great guests, I want to remind everyone that this is, I think, the third or the fourth in a series of these events we are doing between now and Election Day. This event is open to all, and I want to start by thanking our sponsor, State Democracy Defenders Fund, for making this event possible. On October 29th, we will have a live event with Representative Jamie Raskin and hosted by Brian Tyler Cohen. That will also be available to everyone. We are working hard to organize these events and others with great guests. That will likely continue into the post-election. So please stay tuned for more. And as I mentioned, this event is sponsored by our wonderful partners at State Democracy Defenders Fund. They bring together a nonpartisan team to work with national, state, and local allies across the country to defend in real time the foundations of our democracy and free and fair elections. And they are co-founded by my good friend and partner in good things. I'm not going to say in crime, Norm, because otherwise the right wing will take it out of perspective. But good, my co-pilot in all of the good things in protecting democracy, Norm Eisen, is co-moderating this with me. And let me introduce him and the panelists before we kick this off. So Norm Eisen is, to me and to the rest of us, Ambassador Norm Eisen. He is a senior fellow at the Governance Studies at Brookings Institute. He is the executive chair of States United Democracy Center and served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee for the Trump impeachment from February 2019 to February 2020. He is the former ambassador to the Czech Republic from 2011 to 2014. And was special counsel and special assistant to the president for ethics and government reform from under President Obama from January 2009, when the president was sworn in, until January 2011, when he became ambassador. He was colloquially known as the ethics czar, but as I said, I call him my friend, which he is. And prior to that, he and I worked together on lots and lots of things that involve democracy and elections. So welcome, Norm Eisen. Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes is here as our special guest. He practiced law for 15 years before running for office in 2016. I'm sure he probably looks back at that decision as both a good thing and a bad thing. Got him out of the practice of law, got him into the public service, where he has been ever since. He was the Maricopa County Recorder from 2017 to 2021, which, for everyone who has followed Arizona politics knows, put him at the centerpiece of all of the big democracy fights and all of the big democracy successes. And then in 2022, he ran against election denier Mark Fincham and beat him to become Arizona's Secretary of State, a position he holds today and which we are lucky and grateful that he holds today. We're also joined by my good friend Jenna Griswold, who is Colorado Secretary of State. She almost needs no introduction. She practiced international anti-corruption law and worked as a voter protection attorney before running for office. She was first elected in 2018 as the youngest elected Secretary of State and was reelected in 2022 and does a phenomenal job in Colorado that has some of the best administered election and voting laws in the country. New Mexico, we are also joined by New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, who is a lifelong resident of New Mexico. She started her public service career in 2007 as a county clerk of New Mexico's largest county, and she has been the elected Secretary of State since 2016, was reelected in 2018 and again in 2022, and the citizens of New Mexico are well served by her and are lucky to have her in place. And finally, I want to introduce a great Secretary of State, Stephen Hobbs, from the great state of Washington, where my law firm, I should point out, has its only other office other than Washington, D.C. And I want to thank him for his service. He is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army National Guard, where he has served for 24 years. He was a Washington State Senator from 2007 to 2021, and then became the Secretary of State of Washington State, where he has served ever since. So I want to thank all of the panelists and my co-host, Norm Eisen, for coming today, and thanking them for taking time out of their busy schedules only a little more than 2 weeks before Election Day. So welcome everyone for joining us. All right, I want to kick this off by starting with you, Secretary Fontes in Arizona. It is fair to say that the right wing has not stopped attacking Arizona's election system since 2020. You will probably say since before 2020, but it's really been quite a remarkable run in that, at least in most other states, we saw at least a pause after the 2020 election where they took a breath. But really, you guys have been under nonstop attack from election deniers ever since. And, you know, I get as many questions about Arizona as I do any place in the country. So what are you doing to prepare for is almost certainly going to be election deniers lying once again about Arizona, its election processes, and, you know, let's face it, probably also its election results?
Well, first, Mark, thanks to you and Norm and my other colleagues on the call. What are we doing? Everything that we can afford to do. We wish we had more resources to do more. But I'll just give you a quick laundry list. We've augmented the training that we were giving to our elections officials under that state certification. It had been a lot of kind of policy and philosophy oriented, having been an election administrator at the county level, like Secretary Toulouse Oliver had as well. We moved and shifted our training down to the hands-on. This is what you got to do to get the fundamentals right. That's kind of the underlying core of everything we've done. We held tabletop exercises with deep fakes of myself and others, not just for our elections workers, but for law enforcement officers, and separate tabletops with that separate focus. And then another separate one for members of the local, state, and national media to get those folks engaged, because we've got to communicate across the board, and getting everybody on board with the program is really critically important as well. We've got a fellowship program where we've got about 24 young people, college graduates and seniors in college who are out there in the counties working in those offices. Not only are we getting them those extra bodies as a resource, but we're training in the process that next generation of elections officials to come on up. We're attacking the election deniers at every stage. As you've indicated, we didn't get a break in 2022. In fact, that's when we ran against an election denier for U.S. Senate, for governor, for secretary, for attorney general. You know, it's funny. I think we put the AZ in crazy when it comes to those folks and their undeniable thirst for conspiracy theories. But look, at the end of the day, it comes down to our people and their preparedness at the counties. We're a bottom-up state. The counties are where all the action is. We're the ones that regulate, help them get resources, and we've been doing our level best to make sure that it happens well for those clerks, for those election workers, and for those temporary folks who come in just to help their neighbors vote on Election Day.
Yeah, I'm just gonna brag about you for 1 second and ask you to expand on one thing, which is you also accomplished something which is critically important. You promulgated an election procedure manual, which had not been done for a few years, and you successfully navigated that. You have been under litigation from the right about that, and you have defeated virtually all of it. So maybe you could also just say a word for people who are concerned about elections in Arizona, about the importance of the EPM and the good work you've done there, because I think that's part of what you've done to prepare for the elections as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Arizona, like a few states, has in statute the promulgation of an elections procedures manual. We hadn't been able to get one officially taken care of outside of the purview of the courts for several years, which is problematic because as the election laws change, we want everybody to have a standardized view. And by everybody, I mean our county officials, that standardized view of how the rules of the road are supposed to be accomplished. I know we're not the only state to have it, but we had some trouble. And it wasn't until my administration came on board, along with Governor Hobbs, who used to be, or was my predecessor, the Attorney General, Chris Mays, we got together finally once my office did this. And I actually have a copy sitting right here. It's this skinny little thing with all the stuff that you need to run an election in Arizona. And the challenge on this one is really interesting. Maricopa County, Arizona is the second largest voting jurisdiction in the nation outside of Los Angeles County. And we have some of the smallest jurisdictions in the country. So that manual's got to apply to all of them. We had a lot of input from our folks at the counties. Give them as much credit and my staff as much credit as they deserve for putting this together, getting it off the ground and being able to successfully defend it against almost every single legal challenge that it has faced over the last year or so.
Thank you. Secretary Griswold, Jenna, you have been vocal. I interviewed you on my podcast. You have been very vocal about the need for increased security for election officials. And this has become even more critical in the aftermath of 2020. I think it is no understatement to say that, people who signed up to be the good stewards of our democracy are now facing threats and attacks that are unprecedented and which they shouldn't have to face. And this has become especially bad in recent years since 2020. What measures are in place this year to protect election officials and poll workers? Why should people have confidence that it will be safe and secure for their mothers or their spouses to work at the polls as volunteers, for people like you to be election officials, or for voters to show up?
Well, thanks for having us for this conversation. And first off, we have to continue voting. Part of the threat environment is to create chaos and make people afraid. So we cannot give in to those inclinations. At the same time, while we have to recognize the threat environment is very real. To share with folks, there are 891 participants on. I've received nearly 1,000 threats since just last September, when a lawsuit was filed against me to disqualify Trump off the ballot. At this point, 3 men have been arrested, 2 guilty. One is in plea negotiations, and one was actually arrested while I was in the hospital welcoming our new son to the world. So the threat environment follows you through every single part of your life. It's not like I clock out at 5 or 6 o'clock and suddenly it's not there. It's with you. In Colorado, we've taken it really seriously. I passed a law making it a crime to retaliate against election workers. We made it a crime to open carry or conceal carry close to voting. And I've been really vocal about it. I think I was one of the first elected officials to talk about the threat environment to election officials, in part because I think Americans deserve to know, and in part because it's really important that women don't get bullied out of office. We need more women in office, not less. And unfortunately, the threats are of sexual nature, are of violent nature, predominantly go to women, predominantly go to people of color, and the majority of election workers across this country are women. With that said, even living in this threat environment for me since 2021, I have not stopped. Colorado is considered the nation's gold standard. We've increased drop boxes by 70%. We passed parolee reenfranchisement, automatic voter registration, which registered 660,000 new voters. We saw a 20% increase on voting on tribal lands, one presidency to the next, one presidential election to the next. And when it comes to the attacks on democracy, I think we're one of the most prepared states going into this election cycle. So all that to say is that we have to take threats of violence very seriously. I do not think enough has been done by state or federal officials. I'll continue to speak out. We will continue to take action here. And ultimately, we cannot allow people who would use threats or violence to go unchecked. That means making a plan to vote, supporting election workers, and doing everything that we can to save democracy this election cycle.
Wow. Secretary Toulouse Oliver, you are the Secretary of State of New Mexico, and people don't realize, I do because I follow election in New Mexico, that you have had to deal with the same challenges of election deniers as elsewhere. And people right now are very concerned about election deniers and what they might do to refuse to certify election results. You successfully fought back in 2022 when Otero County commissioners, including Cowboys for Trump founder Couy Griffin, refused to certify election results. So tell us, like, how do Secretary of States ensure that the certification process moves forward smoothly, and what do you want the people watching this live or later on video to know about that certification process?
Well, thank you, Mark and Norm, and thanks to my awesome colleagues here. It's just a really unfortunate thing that, rather than, as you are well aware, Mark, dealing with questions of the validity of an election can be handled through the courts, and that is the normal course of action. And certifying election results is what we call a ministerial duty. In other words, it's required, and you have to do it. It's part of the job. And the point of having a commission or some sort of board of canvass or board of certification sign off on the election results is to just ensure that it got done, right? That the canvass was completed, that the clerk or local election official or state election official that was responsible did the job. It's not a policy-making body. They're not there, to throw a monkey wrench in the process. But of course, what we saw in 2022 in my state and elsewhere was they were starting to run the 2024 playbook, right? Let's try to experiment with this and see where it takes us. We were having none of it. We went straight to the New Mexico Supreme Court. The New Mexico Supreme Court agreed with us and told that county commission, you will certify or you will be removed from office, because if you cannot complete your basic function, your ministerial duty as a commission, you're not going to be in office anymore. And we are hopeful that that action in my state, first and foremost, is, and we haven't seen anything like that since, is the good news. And we've had a couple of elections since then. We are hopeful that in November, that message has been sent loud and clear. You don't certify, you can ask questions, you can ask for information, but if you don't certify results, you're not doing your job. And again, we're not going to use the certification process to throw a monkey wrench in the election outcome. You can file in court, once an election is certified in our state, you and many others, you can file, an election contest, something like that. But so I'm hopeful that what happened here not only prevents it from happening here again this year, but that it's also sent a loud message to other states. And I know many of my colleagues are already getting preemptory court orders, saying this shall happen, and passing laws such as in Minnesota to say, make it very clear that this is a duty. So we're all really hopeful that at least, we know there's going to be shenanigans, but we're hopeful that at least along the certification process, we've been able to navigate that scenario so that it's not such a stressful and unnecessary one this November.
Secretary Hobbs, as my colleagues, and it seems like an endless series of people in my life always remind me that Washington State was one of the first to implement vote by mail statewide. It was in 2011. Your constituents love it. I never run into someone from Washington State who's not insistent that you guys have the best system. Your vote by mail system is the best system in the country, although I'm sure Secretary Griswold would contest that fact. But in recent years, what began as sort of a bipartisan proposal that both Democrats and Republicans loved has become very much a partisan dispute in other parts of the country, with Republicans, including Donald Trump, attacking voting by mail as unreliable, as fraud-ridden, and as something to avoid. What do you say to those in other states who attack vote by mail, or voters who, as a result of having been lied to, are now nervous or skeptical to use voting by mail?
Well, first of all, don't be nervous. Jump in the water. It's great. In this state, the Secretary of State before me and before her, for 60 years was Republicans. It's a Republican idea. Republicans push this, and you're right, Mark. It was bipartisan, and all of a sudden, I think we know why. All of a sudden, it's being attacked, and part of it, I kind of blame myself and others in my work, my profession, is we just haven't talked about what we would know as the boring process of elections, right? I mean, we have to talk about it now. We have to talk about the sausage making of elections. So basically, we check every signature. We're part of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. Everyone knows about this, right? I mean, databases talk to one another. There's a paper trail involved. But the problem is that we haven't talked about it. And so we have allowed the other side to create these false narratives. And the average citizen who has nothing to bounce this information against, right? They just take it as fact. And so now we're trying to shove that genie back in the bottle and let people know about how it works around here. I mean, what a great system where you get your ballot 18 days before the election. You have the comfort of your own home to decide who you want to vote for. You really have three choices on how to take your ballot to the election center. You could either drop it in the mail. And by the way, in this state, you don't even need to put a stamp on it. Postage is paid for in this state. It's great. You can go to a drop box. And if you want to go old school, you can go to the election center and just do it right in person if you really want to do that. But really, we just got to talk more about what happens in the election process. And people wonder, it's like, well, how do I know my ballot's being tracked, or what's going on? Well, here's the great thing. We've got a database. It'll tell you when your ballot's going out. If you sign up for text messaging, it'll text you and say, hey, your ballot's been received. And if your signature doesn't match, or you forgot to do your signature, it tells you when your ballot has been rejected, needs to be cured. So you just sign another form and then your ballot will be counted. But that's what we got to do. We got to just talk about how mail-in ballots are secure, transparent, and accessible.
Well, I want to turn this over to my co-host, Norm Eisen, to keep the questioning going. But before we do, Norm, as I said at the beginning, you have been integral to these fights for democracy now for, I don't want to say decades, because then you're going to say that I made you seem old, but for a very long time. And the work you are doing right now is essential to the future of free and fair elections. And, among the organizations that you have been involved in helping to found or to help stand up has been State Democracy Defenders Fund. So I want to turn it over to you both for you to offer your perspective on where we are in election security and election administration, the work that State Democracy Defenders Fund does, and then to pick up the question.
Thank you, Mark. It's so nice to be with you. And we've just hit 900 folks watching. When you and I started, I think we can confess it was decades ago. When you and I started doing this work together decades ago, it would have been hard to imagine that 2 weeks out from a presidential election, one of the hottest topics, and hundreds of thousands of people will view this, would be talking with secretaries of state. No offense to my friends. I love them. I represent them and I work with them. But that it would be such a nexus of national and international attention, or that we would be confronting deadly serious threats that you talked about with the secretaries, like disinformation about what used to be a bipartisan, neutral area of governmental administration, disinformation and election denial, physical threats to our secretaries of state and our election workers all over the country. The refusal that we actually would have not only the idea, but a pattern that has been established around the country of extremists on county election boards and in other places refusing to certify election results with no reason whatsoever, or that something as positive and conservative leaning as vote by mail would be surrounded by these crazy theories. I think we would have had a hard time comprehending that when we started together all those years ago at State Democracy Defenders Fund. we have come together in a bipartisan fashion. My friend George Conway and I are among the co-founders, together with some of the most distinguished, safe, free, and fair election advocates in the country on both sides of the aisle, to respond to this unprecedented threat. We do that in three ways. First, as we'll discuss today, securing elections in real time, where we're active across the country. Second, holding accountable those, whether it's through our program, our innovative program of public support for criminal prosecutions, bar discipline, other forms of accountability for those who commit wrongdoing, because that's the only way that you can assure that it doesn't happen again. And third, looking forward, like with our Autocracy in America conference in New York, looking forward in a bipartisan fashion. Hundreds of Republicans attended the conference. How do we deal with this phenomenon of authoritarianism that is rising in our country? Election denial is the seed that drives this larger pattern, and all of that has to be done in a bipartisan way. And I'm so honored to be here with these four secretaries who are my friends, and so proud of the work that all of you are doing. Secretary Griswold, I'm going to start with you. Your 2022 opponent and known election denier, Tina Peters, just got a measure of that accountability that we're talking about. She was sentenced to prison for 9 years for her voting data breach scheme. Can you talk a little bit about how your office is working to prevent future breaches like that one, learning from this scandalous case, which garnered nationwide attention?
Of course. The only thing I would really disagree with you on is election officials, secretaries of state, at least the Democrats, are very fun, Norm. Everybody should want to hang out with us all the time. We're a party. But to get serious, I addressed the first insider threat that was public in the nation in 2021. And that's when a county clerk for the county of Mesa County, where Grand Junction is located, compromised her own voting equipment trying to prove Trump's big lie. If you're not familiar with the case, look into it. It's ridiculous. There was a former pro surfer, identity theft. It just ran the gamut. Anyhow, we discovered the potential breach because we saw the voting passwords for that county's voting equipment online. And I think part of the thing I would say is the fact that we discovered it shows how strong Colorado's election model is. We discovered it months before voting equipment was used. I went in, decertified the voting equipment, asked my former Republican opponent to oversee the county, which he did. We worked with the Republican county commissioners to remove that county clerk. And then it took about 3 years, but she was just found guilty of 3 felonies, 4 misdemeanors, and was sentenced to 9 years of incarceration. Subsequent to that, I led the nation's first law on insider threats. It's now a felony to compromise voting equipment. We built in whistleblower protections so that folks tell us if there's a problem without fear of retribution. And then we actually upgraded the rooms in the security around voting equipment. Prior, cameras were on about 3 months before and 3 months after an election. Now they're on 24/7, and we're requiring badge access. So folks actually have to badge in. And of course, it was a travesty for this because no person elected to oversee elections should be compromising their system to push out disinformation. Tina Peters also added to all the disinformation swirling around Colorado and the nation about our voting systems, which led to threats against her colleagues, other county clerks. So we were quick to tighten those laws. We've also tightened laws looking ahead to the election cycle we're now in. It's illegal to be a fake elector or conspire to be a fake elector. We made sure that county officials, election judges at the very end of an election cannot delay certification like we saw in New Mexico. I can actually close out or replace someone if they refuse to certify the election. We made sure that if there's litigation or lawsuits against electors, that goes through Colorado courts really quickly. So we're on top of it. Insider threats to fake electors, to all types of shenanigans or potential shenanigans to delay certification. And the big message out of Colorado is that we will not accept any type of interference in our elections. And every Republican, Democrat, and unaffiliated will have their voice heard in some of the best elections in the country here.
And it's such an important point, Jenna, because I hear so often from folks who are anxious about a repeat of 2020 or even worse. And we know that there are differences from 2020. The threat came from outside the state election system then, and from the Oval Office. Now, the election deniers have burrowed in, and yes, there could be action in that post-election period. But as much as the adversaries of democracy have learned from the past, the champions of democracy have also learned, and learned even more. The system is ready. That doesn't mean that we're not going to see a lot of extremely active election denial activity. Secretary Fontes, Arizona is a hot spot. As much activity as Secretary Griswold has had, I don't know. Arizona is a very special place when it comes to the election denial movement. Gary Lake is still challenging the gubernatorial election results.
Who?
I
don't know who that is.
We are counting on you. You're such a strong champion, you and your colleagues, such strong champions of fighting for safe, free, and fair elections. Will you give us a sense of how this election denier energy might impact certification issues? I know that's something that's very important to you. Certification issues statewide in Arizona.
Well, in Arizona, I don't know that they're going to have that much of an impact because we're pretty doggone ready. We just got an order from the Arizona Supreme Court indicating that an administrative order telling all of the other courts that election cases are going to take precedence over every other case, giving specific deadlines for the end of appeal periods. And that's that. So on that front, we're in great shape. We've worked directly with the Attorney General's office and the governor's office. You know, and all of this is a team effort. Everybody's been working together towards this. No one of us is bigger than the other or more special. We've all got a place to play. So we've been working with our county boards of supervisors who act as the election boards in our counties in Arizona. We've been working with our county recorders, our county election directors. The entire team across the board knows exactly where we're at. We have looked very carefully at some of the ways that we're doing sort of this ministerial thing that I think Maggie mentioned. This is just something that you do. And if you don't do it, like a couple of the supervisors in Cochise County didn't do it in 2022, they're under indictment right now for not certifying their election. And so, we've got some incentives for folks to just do their jobs. But one of the other things I think that's really important here, Norm, that I want to talk to real briefly is this. Election denialism is bad for business. And we've got to a lot of folks who are traditionally very supportive of the conservative side of the aisle, usually very business oriented. And there's a lot of folks that are pulling away from that nonsense because they understand election denialism promotes instability, unreasonableness, some movement away from facts and data. And if we don't get to the point where we really push that message, election denialism is bad for business, then using that, we can welcome a whole lot of other people into the fold on our side of things and just get back to the business of doing the things that we need to do. We've been pretty successful at bringing in allies from all sides of the political aisle. And I'll only take one bit of umbrage at what you said, that this used to be bipartisan. Election administration is still bipartisan, and the folks who run elections are still bipartisan. It is the extra partisan authoritarian lean, the extra American, and that means outside of the United States of America, weird crap that we've had to deal with for all of these years. That is not political. It is the antithesis of political. It's systemic and it's dangerous. And that's why we got to keep fighting as hard as we can. And we keep making these messages strong and sensible. We're going to bring more and more allies on board, and those folks will find themselves more isolated.
Thanks, Adrian. As Secretary Hobbs, you have an additional power, which is thanks to a new law that Governor Inslee signed this year. You have the ability to certify election results, even if a county refuses to do it. Why is that necessary? And do you think you're going to have to use it against these super election denial energies that Secretary Fontes is quite right, outside of the mainstream consensus? We need safe, free, and fair elections.
Norm, it's like you didn't listen to what everyone was saying. Yeah, we got to have these laws in place. In fact, when we just when I took office, we had a slew of laws to try to secure our elections and democracy. And Norm, you said it best. It's like the adversaries of democracy, these election deniers, are constantly trying to find new ways to throw monkey wrenches into the system, which is why when I first took office, we passed things like making it a Class C felony to harass an election worker. We passed a law recently to attempt to ban deepfakes. This is a real threat. We saw it happen in New Hampshire with the robocalls that sound like Joe Biden. We have to get at that. Now, I feel we need to do more, go after the social media companies, because they're the ones taking the money. They're the ones that are distributing the ads on their platforms, but that's something that we should do. And minimum security standards that we put out there to ensure that every county has to have the proper equipment to secure the elections. I mean, the reason why that law was passed so that I could certify election over a county's objections was because of things that happened with my colleagues. What happened in Arizona and New Mexico. I looked at their states and went, holy, I don't want that to happen to me. You know, I gotta shore up my state. And that's why we passed these bills to do that. And the minimum security bill that I was talking about, we had to pass that because there were counties that were buying into the disinformation of what's called an Albert sensor. Now, a lot of people here who are in the panel knows what that is, but for the general public, it's a detection device that you put on your system. Homeland Security encourages you to have it. And what it does, it's a detection device, right? So if a bunch of data comes from or to a suspicious IP address, you'll know about it. Homeland Security knows about it. But this disinformation campaign was basically saying that it's tied to George Soros. It reads metadata. It changes elections. None of this is true. But unfortunately, a couple of county commissioners bought into it, thought it was true, and voted unanimously to remove the censor. It took a county auditor, to call us up and go, hey, they just removed the censor. And so we have to pass laws like this to ensure that our democracy is safe, because it's not just the crazy people and election deniers and the people that make pillows, but it's also those nation state actors that we got to work
on. Secretary Toulouse Oliver, speaking of passing laws that make our elections safe, improve election administration, and help the voters, this will be the first presidential election with the New Mexico Voting Rights Act in effect. That's such an important model piece of legislation. We can only hope that we'll see similar legislation soon nationwide. Will you just tell us a little bit about that bill and the impact you expect it to have on the election? We're going to end on a high note.
Well, thank you, Norm. We're of course incredibly proud of that piece of legislation here, and it was the work of many years and many folks, myself included. Here's what I can tell you. First of all, we stole from some of my colleagues here. So some of the pieces of the New Mexico Voting Rights Act come from Washington, Colorado, and Arizona. We also created, I thought it was the first in the nation, but I was corrected, Steve, by your predecessor, Kim Wyman. It's the second Native Voting Rights Act component in the nation, which, hey, amazing. And so we have a lot of protections in place for our Native voters here in the state, which are 12% of our population. I know that Steve and Jenna and Adrian all have very significant Native populations in their states. And one of the challenges we had in 2020, in particular, when we were on COVID lockdown, was how to make sure that our Native voters, because I will tell you, the tribes were on it. They were not letting people in. They were not letting people out. They were protecting their elders and their folks and making sure that their people were not dying from COVID. But then we have the challenge of, well, then how do we make sure that they can vote? Because in a lot of our tribal communities, making sure that that sort of traditional polling place option within the community is really important. So the Native Voting Rights Act component of the New Mexico Voting Rights Act was really important for that reason. We are now going to move toward where Colorado and Washington are, because we have a permanent vote by mail component of the law. I personally am a permanent vote by mail voter now, so I always get my ballot in the mail. And I agree with my colleagues that once we get to a critical mass, we're going to be able to hopefully maybe move to the same model that you are employing, Jenna and Steve, in your states. And then another piece is that as of next year, we will have, we have automated voter registration at MVD right now in New Mexico. If you watch Breaking Bad, we call it MVD, Motor Vehicle Division, not DMV. But we will have at the DMV or MVD full automatic voter registration starting the next summer. And we're working on that now. So it's an exciting time to run an election with all sorts of accessibility to our election processes. And I just, if we're ending on this note, I want to emphasize, and I think I speak for all of my colleagues here, in fact, I know I do, we don't have to sacrifice accessibility for security. We don't have to sacrifice accessibility for integrity. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I'm proud of the law we passed here, but I'm proud of the work we have all done on this call, and so many more of our colleagues that are not here, to make sure that voters have access to the ballot. It's not hard to cast your ballot. You don't have to jump through hoops and go over hurdles, but also to make sure that our elections are secure and have integrity. We can do both at the same time. And I think we are all proudly doing that. And we're very proud of the work that we've done. And we're going to be proud about how this election is administered this year, because we're all putting our whole hearts and minds, bodies, and souls, and our poor families. Gosh, I don't even want to go there into it, especially Jenna with a new baby. But we're really proud of the work we do, and we are going to guarantee that accessibility and security at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretaries. That ends my conversation with all of you, but we have a bonus period.
Yes.
Mark is going to do a lightning round of questions for the Secretaries. Passing it back to Mark.
Yes, and we are not yet at the hour, but we're coming up on it. So I'm going to ask everyone to keep their answers short and clear. But the biggest question I get, the biggest question I see in the Q&A, and we've had a number of people post questions, is voters who are concerned. They read in the newspaper every day a lot of different information, and they live busy lives. They have jobs, they have other things going on that they have to balance, and they read on the one hand all of this scary information or scary predictions. On the other hand, they want to do their civic duty. You all run the elections, and part of that is the technical stuff that we've been talking about, but some of it is just telling ordinary and average everyday Americans what to do and how to feel about voting. So what is your message to the citizens of your state, to the citizens of the country, people who are watching this video about voting and whether they can feel confident that it's secure and that their vote will be counted? So let's start in New Mexico with Secretary of State Toulouse Oliver.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'll just say what I just said. We don't have to sacrifice accessibility for election integrity. Every election official that is working this cycle is 100% dedicated to ensure an accurate vote count this year. I will bet my 18 years of running elections at the local or the state level on that. And I just want to assure voters that making sure the vote count is accurate and secure is our #1 priority.
Secretary Fontes.
Vote early. Vote early. Don't vote often, but vote early. And remember, in most of our states, you've got a lot of options to vote in a lot of different ways you can do it. Around the country, there are early voting periods. Vote early. And remember this, the bad guys want to keep us away from our democracy. They want to keep us away. Be like the suffragettes. Be like the folks in the civil rights movement, except that you don't have to get shot down with a water cannon or have dogs loosed on you like those heroes did. All you got to do is show up and vote. That's what I would tell citizens across the entire land.
Secretary Hobbs.
Yeah, look, elections are not a mystery, and they shouldn't be. If you have a question, just go ask. Go ask your local county, auditor in my state, clerks in other states. In most cases, you can actually see the process for yourself. Don't make it a mystery. It shouldn't be. You don't have to seek strange places on the internet to find out what's going on with your vote or your ballot or elections. You can actually see it with your own eyes. So if you have any questions, go to your local county and go find out.
Secretary Griswold.
I would just say that #1, Colorado is tied for #1 in terms of voter confidence. So that's always great. Coloradans love our elections. But on top of Colorado's elections being so safe and trustworthy, the country's elections are safe and trustworthy. You look at the 2020 election, it was the safest election in American history. And it's not just Democrats who said that. So I think it's really important to get good information. There's all this bad information out there. Go to your Secretary of State, a local county clerk to get that good information. But more than just that, Adrian is right. It is so easy for many of us, not all of us, but many of us to cast a ballot. And for those where it is harder, you live in a state where your secretary, your governor has been putting in restrictions, you still really need to just go vote. This election is about whether women are considered full citizens, whether we have the ability to have babies when we want to, get the medical treatment that we need. It's about whether we're going to have a democracy that works, whether we're going to have champions to fight for what needs to be done with climate change. It does matter. So make a plan to vote, just get it done. And hopefully we'll have great results and a strong, vibrant democracy after this election.
And Norm, I'm not going to let you off the hook. You're not a secretary, but I'm going to ask you the same question. What should citizens who read all of this stuff and are worried, what should they be thinking?
That worry comes from a good place because our fellow Americans have concern for the future of our democracy. But to the hundreds of people who joined us tonight and the hundreds of thousands who watch this on YouTube and elsewhere, and the millions of folks, you can be confident that you will be able to have your ballot cast and counted, that the vast majority of those who are a part of the system are experienced, are dedicated to the effective operation of our election administration. So whoever you're going to vote for, you can go vote. You can do it with pride and confidence. Don't let those anxieties do anything other than fueling you to run a little faster either to your polling place or to your mailbox or Dropbox for your vote by mail.
Yeah, and I'm just going to echo something that I think I heard from a number of you. The cynics want you to think that voting is complicated. The cynics want you to walk away from the process. They want you to think your vote may not count. And the reason why Norm and I wanted to do this event tonight, just a couple weeks before the election, is that you could hear directly from the people who are running the elections. You don't need to take my word for it. You don't need to take Norm's word for it. You don't have to go to some sketchy website. You don't have to go to the internet at all. You could hear from the people directly who are making sure that voting is accessible to you and that you'll be able to cast your ballot. That ballot will be accurately counted, that there'll be certification of those votes that accurately reflect the results. And that, sure, there may be people who try to disrupt one part of it or another, but that there are professionals who are dedicating their lives and have the resources to make sure that the process works. So don't let the cynics win. If you are hearing me today, this is what I'd ask you to do. Number one, make sure you're registered to vote. Okay. If you're not sure, again, you don't have to go to some sketchy place on the website. Go to their websites. Go to the Secretary of State or your county election official's website, and they can tell you, or call them, and they can help make sure to find out if you're registered to vote. If you're not registered and you're in a state that still allows voter registration or same-day registration, register. Become a registered voter. Make a plan to vote. We've heard a lot of things today about, do you want to vote by mail? Do you want to vote in person? I love the fact that Secretary Hobbs in Washington State of all places says, you know what, if you want to show up in person, do that. May not be most people's cup of tea, but make your plan. Do you want to vote in person? Do you want to vote by mail? Do you want to use a Dropbox? Do you want to put it in the mailbox? Do you want to drop it off in person? Make a plan. And then most importantly, vote. Don't let yourself have your voice extinguished because of disinformation or misinformation that is given. Okay, you have a right to participate and make sure you exercise your right and have your and vote. And these good folks, the folks you're seeing tonight, they're going to make sure your vote counts. So you do your part, they'll do their part, and together we will have a successful, free and fair election, and democracy will be sustained. So I want to thank all of the secretaries for being on this event tonight. I want to thank Norm Eisen, who is a wonderful human being, in addition to being a phenomenal lawyer and also the head of a tremendous organization in our sponsor state, Democracy Defender Fund. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you who have come out for this event or are watching this now on YouTube. And I want to make sure you know about our future events, because as I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a larger series that we have, and we have some exciting upcoming events, including on October 28th with Stacey Abrams and Teresa Kumar. And I promise you, we're going to be announcing some additional special guests. And October 29th, a live chat moderated by Brian Tyler Cohen with Representative Jamie Raskin and myself, as well as other events that are soon going to come. Please make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. If you want more than that, you become a member and go to democracydocket.com to find out how to do all of that. Once again, thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you, secretaries, for being here, and thank you, Norm Eisen, for everything you do for democracy. Good night.